Hello, and welcome to Faces of Stone, the Star Wars edition. I'm Amanda Sisk, and I'm here with my two fellow panelists, Marc-Anthony Macon, who, of course, was originally cast as KS2O, but was ultimately fired when the mohawk he was sporting kept interfering with the green screen. Marc-Anthony
Problematic.
Macon. Yeah. And Noah Diamond. Noah, who was considered to be the natural choice, of course, for Chirrut Imwe, but he looked so much like Harrison Ford that they decided the audience would be confused by it. So Noah Diamond, let's give him a big welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's this damn scar on my chin. I can't do anything about it.
And I'm Amanda Sisk, and I've never been asked to be in any Star Wars movie. But that's... So today, we're going to talk about Rogue One, which I'm talking right now because it is my favorite Star Wars movie. And that may not be the case in 10 years because obviously I've not seen it anywhere near the number of times that I've seen the original trilogy. So I would like to talk about that first, about how we feel about the fact that this is a very new movie. We haven't watched it a billion trillion times. How is our, I know that some of us like it very much, some of us are just kind of ambivalent. How do we think that over time it's going to change our minds about it? And did that happen with the original trilogy? Noah?
Well, I mean, I really feel that this, oh, sorry, Noah, you were called on and not me.
No, I was just trying to get somebody to talk.
Oh, you take
right.
it. You've already,
okay.
You've got
well, I mean, I think that the first time that I saw it, it really didn't resonate with me much at all. And I didn't leave hating it, but I left kind of feeling like that was a decent Star Wars movie, but I didn't really feel connected to any of the characters in any. And then the second time that I watched it, I felt somewhat still that way, a little less so. But the more times I've watched it, the more I've really come to like this movie. And especially watching it a few times over the last couple of weeks in preparation for this, I've come to appreciate it a lot more, and it's moved pretty high up in my list. So I think, like a lot of Star Wars movies, repeat viewings can really give you more to appreciate with it.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the richness of the Star Wars universe is part of what makes all of these movies worth watching a few times, even the ones that maybe on first viewing wouldn't have ranked as your favorites. I think Rogue One is excellent. I saw it in the theater when it was new, and I just thought it was very exciting from the start. But I think its excellence, it exists as a kind of footnote to Episode 4. A very rich, lively, interesting footnote that expands and deepens the main text. But I find it a little hard to compare it to the main text. And I think our last episode, when we ranked all the Star Wars movies in order of preference, and Rogue One seemed kind of far down on my list considering how thoroughly I enjoy it. But that's why I think its goals are smaller than the goals of the main trilogy, and that's one of its strengths, not one of its weaknesses. It's a movie based on the crawl from Episode 4, basically, and it gets inside the story of how those rebel spies we knew almost nothing about got the plans to the point where they're on Leia's ship at the beginning of Episode 4. It's hard to imagine anybody who didn't have a deep love of the original trilogy finding it as rich as we do. But I do, and I do.
I think that I disagree with you, Noah, or we feel differently about it. I think that this movie...
Excuse me.
I'm trying to talk.
That was nothing to sneeze at.
All right, so I think I disagree with the idea that it's kind of this footnote, a very rich footnote, but a footnote nonetheless. I feel like it makes, this is too big of a statement, it doesn't make everything worth it, but it makes so many things worth it. It ties so many things together for me. It's so important because it's that one line of the crawl, but nothing would have ever happened. This is the catalyst for everything that I love. So I feel like it feels very grave and important to me. Especially since everybody dies.
Yes, that makes it grave, certainly. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that's right. But I think that's what, it has its own greatness, but its greatness is is contingent on the greatness of episode 4 and all the mythology around it. I mean, it.
Well, you know, I want to interject here, just saying that we watched it a couple of weeks ago with our friend Alina, who had not seen any of the Star Wars movies, so we've been watching them all. She's been watching them with us along the way as we do this, and so she really didn't have the context of episode 4 when watching this. She, you know, kind of may have some broad stroke things like that's when Luke Skywalker shows up or something like that. But when she was watching this without knowing those references deliberately, she really got into it, and she really liked it quite a lot.
Oh, well, there you have it.
So I contest what you said.
Fair enough.
Marc-Anthony, you said something about how the characters didn't grab you the first time you saw it, and
yeah,
it grew on you, but it wasn't the characters. I also feel like I can't believe you said that, actually, because I mean, I feel like the characters are the most important part of this film, and I believe that there's so many great characters in this film. So that blew my mind that you just said that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the issue with this might be that in a lot of ways they're much more subtle characters than Star Wars has ever had. And
right.
You know, when you're going into a Star Wars movie, you're expecting, you know, these kind of big blaring personalities to be delineated, and it's a lot more murky in this film.
That's what a lot of people talk about, is how gray this movie is.
Mm-hmm.
In all ways, it's gray instead of black and white. And no, you were going to say something?
I think I agree with you that the characters are a major strength, and I think maybe even especially the cast is a major strength. The movie has a great cast, and I think it might be the hippest and most international and interracial cast of any Star Wars movie. And you know, it's very beautifully done, I think, from the actors' angle. The main protagonists certainly are, you know, engaging and likable, and it's easy to believe that they're breathing the same air as the heroes from the original trilogy. But maybe even more so, the supporting characters, Ben Mendelsohn as Krennic, you know, that he is, I think, a great scenery-chewing, detestable Star Wars villain. And that part succeeds exactly the way Paul Bettany's does not succeed, I think, in Solo. It was impossible for me to imagine Bettany's villain in Solo being part of this universe. But this guy Krennic, I mean, he fits right in with Tarkin and Vader and everybody we know. That's a wonderful performance. Mads Mikkelsen as Galen Erso, too, is kind of even though this isn't his role, it's sort of the equivalent of an old Jedi character in one of the other films. Like, it's very nicely done that way. We also might mention, you know, Peter Cushing is in this movie as Tarkin.
Right. The estate of Peter Cushing is in this movie.
The estate, yes. And I think one of the reasons that does work for me is that there's such a multiplicity of approaches to that stuff. You know, there's a new actress playing Mon Mothma.
No, there's not. Oh,
well, she was in episode 3, but was cut from it.
Yes.
I think she is, actually. I think you can spot her in episode
cut from Solo or something.
Oh. But that's a character from the original films who is here played by another performer. We have Darth Vader, again, voiced by James Earl Jones, but with different guys in the suit. Peter Cushing is a combination of an actor, Guy Henry, impersonating him with Peter Cushing's face digitally imposed on him. And, you know, and Jimmy Smits comes back as Bail Organa. And so this combination of, like, the original actors in some roles and new actors in some, and CGI puppetry for others. To me, it really works. It points to how CGI and other digital effects can be really effective in movies that don't feel thoroughly artificial.
I also just want to say that of all of the actors that you know, could have this happen to them, one that I'm pretty sure would enjoy the fact that he was brought back to life in an unsettling way.
Peter Cushing.
Yeah.
He looked very much like a video game to me, and I wasn't sure why they spent I just kept thinking, oh my God, they're spending so much money right now. They're spending so much money right now. And it went on for, it would have been okay and a little nod if he had had like a line or two, but I got uncomfortable watching him because I felt like he was one of those interstitials in one of these newfangled video games that the kids play these days.
Yeah, it's not completely convincing, and it does occasionally wander into the uncanny valley a little bit. But I think it's still a worthwhile effort. I'm glad they tried it, and I think it's the kind of thing that, even if I don't know if there is such a thing as 100% convincing when you know that it's a digital recreation.
That's very true. And how did you feel about Carrie Fisher?
You mean in general?
No, as Leia, the generated Leia.
I think it's great. I think it might have made me less comfortable if they had tried to give New Hope era Leia a big role, but to just bring her on at the end to say one word as a surprise, and I wasn't expecting it the first time I saw the movie. I think it's great. I think it's perfect. You know, I wouldn't want the camera to linger on her much longer than it does, but for what it is, I think it's a beautiful way to end this story.
And also, it kind of hit. She passed away right around that time, and so
Yeah.
it really was kind of this stamp on the end of her career that, and then for life, that hope was still there. It was kind of beautiful in that way.
I think I started crying and I couldn't get up and leave as soon as it was over because that really made me cry a lot. I think I cried then, and I cried a lot when she was floating out in space. But that's
in The Last Jedi. Yeah,
that's later. Yeah, but yeah.
Well, Noah, you mentioned the diversity of the cast.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that a little bit. So we've got Chirrut Imwe and we've got Baze, both of these characters.
Right. My favorite gay couple. I love them.
But they're also pretty. I mean, they fill in the various warriors in a pretty neat way. You've got a samurai.
Mm-hmm.
You've got this very mystic, stick guy. Like those two fit in very well. Bodhi is a surprise because you figure I figured at least some sort of Imperial cargo pilot was going to have a little bit more anger, or I don't know, be a little more self-possessed, or he'd already be dead.
He was a pretty jittery Imperial pilot.
He sure was. He sure was. But I love him. So
he's adorable. Yeah.
He's great, and all these characters, I think, of those main protagonists, Riz Ahmed as Bodhi and Diego Luna as Cassian Andor, and perhaps especially Felicity Jones as Jyn Erso, they are all interesting and unusual and distinctive enough performers that they make these parts richer than they might have been on paper. I mean, Bodhi, I don't know if in the script if he's quite that interesting, but Riz Ahmed is such a quirky, and behaviorally he's just such an interesting screen presence. He communicates the troubled state of this defecting pilot.
Donnie Yen, it was apparently his decision to make Chirrut blind.
Oh, no kidding.
It's a good thing he did, too.
It's amazing because he has the second sight, blah, 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 blah. But it also just makes him so distinct, and he's not just this whirling dervish. Though the way he uses that cape and the way he does his martial arts is just some of the most beautiful fighting I've ever seen.
It was pretty.
Yeah. It was pretty.
And, I know how we've talked recently about how, sometimes in these movies, the fight scenes and the action scenes can get a bit tedious after you've seen them even only once. And his are not among those. I love watching him fight, yeah.
Yes.
In general, I mean, as you know, it's never my favorite part of Star Wars, but this movie takes such a novel approach to the action sequences. That I think is another big reason why this is such an interesting and worthwhile movie. It's a real novelty to see a movie that is so convincingly set in the universe of Star Wars, and specifically Episode 4, and yet it also is kind of this gritty, realistic, boots on the ground war movie, and it's sort of a revelation. It's like, oh, this is the war. I mean, this is actually the war that Star Wars is about. I think that's so nicely done, and it's seeing all that handheld camera footage, like you're watching a very a cinema verite kind of Vietnam or World War II film, but it's stormtroopers flying through the air. That's great, and it really is. It's different, but it's in.
So have you seen the director's other movies?
Gareth Edwards, no, Godzilla
right.
is.
So I mean, he did the recent American Godzilla, which is perfectly watchable. I certainly would have a few gripes about it, but it's a Godzilla movie. I was hoping not to love it in every way, or it's not right. And then he also did a movie called Monsters, which is really a kind of beautiful little sci-fi coming of age story in a way. You can see a bit of influence of that seeping into this Star Wars. But it's also clear that he just loves A New Hope with all his heart.
He does. And I mean, he's very good. And the way he talks about this movie is just brilliant. And he said basically he's approaching this movie isn't about it doesn't have Jedi and it doesn't have people who can come in and throw people around with their minds. It's a group of normal people who have to figure out how to solve a problem. And the Force is very far away. Shrewd actually says, "May the force of others be with you." And I'm one with the Force, and the Force is with me. But no one says, "May the Force be with you." It's this, it's back when the dark times, when the Jedi, and then they all come out and they're all there, and then they go back into the dark times again. And it makes, that's what I was saying about this movie, is such a catalyst. Like you said, Noah, this is the war. Oh my God.
I think that the phrase.
I also think that one of the reasons the violence and the war scenes are easy to get through is because there's very few long stretches without a joke in the middle of it. And that usually consists of someone not looking at the person they're shooting. And it happens at least 3 times. And it's such an old trope, and it's obvious. And I laugh and laugh every time it happens. But that kind of thing happens throughout the battles, which I think makes it easier to watch.
There is a pretty good measure of comic relief in the movie. Yeah, sometimes it's battle laughs, like that kind of thing. Jin has a number of those where she just casually shoots a stormtrooper in the crotch or something, and he and Chirrut and Baze. Donnie Yen and Zhang Wen, they have such a good comic interplay between them. I don't need luck. I have you. There's so much great stuff between them. Some of the longer and more drawn out battle sequences too, they're relentless, and their relentlessness is also a novelty. We're used to seeing the big action sequences in Star Wars movies cross-cut between like 2 or 3 or 4 different locations, and we usually get several of those sequences at once. But here you're stuck with these people. You're stuck in the claustrophobia of their struggle, and it's really effective.
I want to go back a little bit to the diversity of the cast, and I want to talk about Diego Luna. And I want to ask also, we're going to do this is a first. There are a lot of firsts happened with this movie. I believe this is the first character who is Hispanic or Latin or Spanish or whatever in the universe he is. Is that true?
The first Latinx Star Wars hero? I mean, Oscar Isaac in The Force Awakens, but he doesn't have an accent as much as Diego Luna does.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah. Is that also true of Riz Ahmed?
Well, I mean, he's British, but I don't know if I don't know. Other people sound like Riz Ahmed. Nobody else sounds like Diego Luna. So Riz Ahmed could be from anywhere, just a galaxy where their skin is darker, or whatever. But
there is a little haziness about how Earth accents translate to the Star Wars universe. And one thing that I have been fascinated by since Force Awakens opened is that John Boyega, who is British, does an American accent as Finn.
Yeah, that is an odd thing.
And there are plenty of Brits on both the Imperial side and the Alliance side. And
well, and considering that he started out Imperial, where there's a lot of British accents going on.
Yeah,
it's odd that. I mean,
but Rey has a British accent. Obi-Wan has a British accent. Sometimes Princess Leia.
It's just kind of giving the finger to England, by saying the guy that broke away from you, he's got our accent.
Close enough.
Okay.
Anyone who may be watching Faces of Stone for the first time tonight, Amanda plays bingo with us, or a version of bingo, which involves ringing a bell when we say things she's written in advance on pieces of paper.
That's right. That's what just happened. So this is the first movie that was not scored by John Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Though you cannot say that there's a lack of John Williams in the score.
Right.
Yeah, there's quite a bit.
And
music is by Michael Giacchino.
Yes, but he was the second person, I think. I think another composer came in as well.
Oh.
But the thing is, if you're working off a theme from John Williams, you can't say he wasn't in it. He did score a lot of this movie just by virtue of scoring everything else.
Yeah, the score samples a lot of themes from the Williams oeuvre.
But otherwise, could you tell was it distracting? Did you notice? Were you like, holy shit, that's not John Williams?
Yeah. I wouldn't say in a horrible way, but in a way that I at least noticed. And when the Williams stuff pops up, it's a little jarring.
Speaking of jarring, and along the same lines, the very beginning of the movie, yeah, it really underlines what a novel thing this is going to be. We get the long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, just like always, and we sit back and wait to read a long crawl, giving us all this backstory. But yes, as Marc-Anthony quoted before he vanished. Oh, there he is again. Yeah, and then you just get sort of a string orchestral hit, and we're right there. I thought that was really effective as a way of telling you right off the bat, this is a familiar world, but this is going to be a little different. And in a way that sort of makes me feel comfortable with the fact that it's not quite a Williams score. I
think also from the very, very beginning, at least I was distracted from everything by how beautiful this movie is. That from the very start, everything is gorgeous. And you see the planet, and you see the belt around the planet, and just how dirty everyone is. And that's even beautiful. It's so gorgeous. And I think
I love the use of scale. In the very beginning there, when we have the ship and the planet rings, and the ship is just this tiny little thing moving across the screen. And it seems like he really plays with scale a lot when you're watching this whole, because especially you have Jin in the jail, and she's just really closed in. And her world keeps opening up, and she gets more and more wide shots as the movie goes on. And I love that.
Speaking of her being in the internment camp, her cellmate, anyone know his name?
Oh, I did know. It's a woman's name, I think.
Oh, is it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Ulan Musters.
Ulan Musters. They hate each other.
Apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he snots all over her, so. Yes,
awkward.
There's no John Williams, so it's gorgeous. What did you feel about the visuals, Noah? It really was, the visuals were kind of a step away from any other Star Wars movie as well, I think.
Yeah.
And beautiful and high budget. And
to me, it feels like the same world as especially Episode 4. But what's different about it visually is the camera work, the way it's filmed. I guess the space sequences are very evocative of the originals. But it's that, it's as though this was a real world and they were making a documentary there, the way a lot of the camera work is in the action sequences, which is most of the movie. There's very little downtime here, which normally is one of the things I miss in Star Wars movies. Like when in the new ones, the characters tend to spend every moment in mortal peril, running for their lives, and you don't have as much hanging out and talking about the Force and stuff. But in this movie, that's what it should be. The story takes place in a very short amount of time, you know, and it is
There
an
is
urgent.
no time to hang out and talk about the Force.
Yeah, there's just no time for that. But I don't know, visually it seems to me like right from the palette of episode 4. We even see the two guys from the cantina. They turn up on
Dr. Evazan and Panda Baba.
Yes, it says you'll be dead.
Yeah.
I just think of that guy as Dave Matthews now.
They're very similar.
Very similar.
The guy with the butt for a mouth.
Yes. It's terrible.
I really found that little bit kind of annoying. It just seemed like a little too like, hey fans, hey.
Along those lines, how about R2 and 3PO? I mean, they were really shoehorned in.
But you know, like here's the thing, I'm bothered by hey, but I'm okay with.
I don't have that. I do not have that on my bingo.
Okay.
One thing. Okay, let's talk about C-3PO. Anthony Daniels. Now, every single movie.
Except Solo.
Yeah, except Solo.
Solo. I don't forget. And apparently, when he kept jokingly but kind of pissily talking about how he had to wear this fucking suit all the time, and it was hot, and it was uncomfortable. And he couldn't sit down, and Alan Tudyk. Just had to wear, bouncy stilts and little balls on him. And apparently this was something he talked about a lot. And when he saw him either at an event or on the red carpet or something, apparently he looked over at him and yelled, "Fuck you!" And Alan Tudyk said that was the best fuck you he'd ever gotten.
I can imagine, because it's in C-3PO's voice.
Yeah.
You, Mr. Tudyk, can just fuck right off.
He's terrific as K2SO, and it seems like this is now a trend because Solo and Rogue One both have this kind of
the sassy droids.
Yeah, sassy droids.
Mm-hmm.
But he's great. His performance as K2SO. Droids with attitude. Yeah, that's what they are.
DWA.
It's actually very much like Solo, which of course came after Rogue One, and not in the chronology of the story, but in terms of when it was made. You know, a droid with attitude who has a noble martyr's death toward the end of the film.
Right. But K2SO doesn't get transformed into, like Luke's X-Wing computer.
That's right.
He's just gone.
Right.
But very good, and especially the moments, where Jen shoots the Imperial droid, and he's standing there. Did you know that wasn't me?
Yeah.
Of course.
My favorite is, and there's a fresh one if you mouth off again. I love that.
That was improvised.
Right, it was improvised.
And he told him to slap him, and that was improvised as well. And I think if you watch it, you can see him laughing. Because I saw it and I was like, wait, no, is he laughing or is that just what he does when he's in pain as an actor?
They're very similar, yeah.
He's smiling after he gets hit.
We might note here that Alan Tudyk is not British, but is putting on a British accent to play this droid.
Yes.
Yes. And, there were an awful lot of explosions for two people trying to blend in. It's got some very good lines, So we talked about, okay, also, well, since we were talking about beautiful things, how beautifully this was shot, on a related beautiful note, let's talk about Forrest Whitaker.
Okay, so, first of all, I never would have expected Forrest Whitaker to be in a Star Wars movie, period. And I certainly would never have expected him to play Saw Gerrera, who was not a huge character in Clone Wars and other shows, but enough of a character that people recognized. And I think young Saw Gerrera was pretty hot, and I don't know if Forrest was ever quite that kind of hot.
He seemed very much to be a Colonel Kurtz kind of character to me. Or Kurtz, Mr. Kurt. He did.
Apocalypse Now is a film that this seems to reference a little bit in general. Yeah, I mean, I don't know Saw Gerrera from Clone Wars, but would you say, Marc-Anthony, I mean, is the version of the character that's presented in Rogue One, is he not a believable
completely
older version.
believable. And I mean, I think that the idea was, from what I've understood, they were creating a character probably for Forrest Whitaker, and it was starting to sound somewhat like Saw Gerrera, so it was recommended, well, why not just make this Saw Gerrera? And so he was, in the Clone Wars, Kenobi and Anakin trained him to fight the droid armies, he and his sister, to kind of create a little rebellion on their planet. And he was a bit extremist at that time too, and he ended up accidentally killing his sister by blowing up a gunship. And then he later went back to Geonosis and tried to kill off the rest of the Geonosians. And he is kind of like a gray, like he's fighting for the rebellion, but his tactics have always been kind of extremist and bordering on terrorism.
I like the idea of that. And, I mean, one of the things that is interesting about Rogue One in general is it, like The Last Jedi, it puts a certain moral ambiguity onto this black and white, good versus evil dynamic that we've gotten used to over the years. Diego Luna's character says, I've done terrible things for the rebellion. We've all done terrible things. It's sort of the reality of like war is not really a virtuous activity most of the time. And so the idea that the rebel side of this conflict has extremists, who are not really favored by the mainstream rebel alliance, that's really interesting. I also read that, fittingly enough, the name Saw Gerrera is meant to evoke Che Guevara, which I don't know why I didn't just notice that without having to. But sure enough. So that's an interesting notion to me, and I like that. We're used to that on the other side. The bad guys in Star Wars often seem to have more autonomy than the good guys.
Well, speaking of moral ambiguity, apparently during the lead up to I didn't know this, you might know this, the lead up to the release of this was right after the election. And the right accused the writers of making political comparisons within the film. Why would you automatically assume that you were the evil empire in this situation?
Yeah.
If they got pissed off because they're the evil empire? Is that?
But I mean, they are. They are the evil. So we can't necessarily blame them for finally getting something right, Amanda.
But I mean, like, it's like saying, like, there's this horrible, horrible character in a movie. It's like, and you go, it's like when Lindsay Lohan got upset because they said that the baby was in that commercial was a drug addict, and she was like, "That's obviously about me." Don't do that. Like,
I don't really get your reference, but okay.
But I just think it's funny that the right immediately came out and said, you are making comparisons with the good guys against us. And
yeah, that's amazing. And that's that's been going on since the original Star Wars and the Vietnam allegory that was intended there. It's amazing. I never get tired of it, nor do I ever understand it. I think the bottom line is, if you want entertainment and media and journalism to reflect your views, try having views that are not repugnant to sensitive and creative and intelligent people.
Okay. Let's go back a bit. We're talking about, we were talking about gray and the good guys versus bad guys and how it is gray. It's ambiguous. And something that occurred to me was, Cassian does say I've done horrible things, and he's blindly followed orders, which is like...
His name is Andor, let's just say. Like, that's...
Wait,
Andor!
Not subtle. His name is Andor.
Yeah.
Incredibly subtle, because I didn't get it. Anyway, so he's done horrible things, and, for the rebellion, he's blindly followed orders, which, as she says, you might as well be a stormtrooper. When he says, I was just following orders. Doesn't sound great. Bodhi comes over from the dark side. He defects. And then a lot of other people do this. And it's under that theme of Galen saying, if you're brave enough, you can make this right. And I think that applies to a lot of different people, including Jen, including Cassian, including Bodhi. If you are brave enough, you can make this right. And I think that's... much more of a theme than good conquering evil. It's just, you know, use your heart. That's what the good heart. That's the hero. Oh no.
Along those same lines, I think connected to that too. Like I remember reading that Lucas said around the time he was finishing A New Hope, the door to your cage is open. All you need to do is walk out if you dare. That was something he said. And I think that like this is a movie full of cages, full of prisons that people have to choose to step out of. And so I think that's.
I think you carry yours with you wherever you go.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's good. It's the prison you're caught in, and you have to make it right. And if by making it right, this is also so much. You see so much more of the reality of a sacrifice for the rebellion. And I'm not just saying everybody dies, but I am saying because they make choices that are going to lead to their death, and they know it. And it's not. They don't have a choice to fight or flee. They know they have to do this. It's going to kill them, and they're just going to sacrifice themselves for their rebellion.
That's really something. I think that's part of what's so compelling about this movie. All through the Star Wars movies, we've heard a lot of talk about dying for a cause, but rarely has a character we love actually had to do it. Or if they do, they come back like Obi-Wan Kenobi. He kind of dies for the cause, but he's only more powerful than ever before. And we see him in every successive film, you know. We never imagined in the original trilogy that we were really going to lose Luke or Han or Leia. But here in Rogue One, all these characters, they decide, like, this is what my life is going to be. I'm going to die so that tomorrow these plans can get in the right hands. And so it feels like a sort of higher stakes war movie than, or at least, if not higher stakes, higher human stakes, more visibly human sacrifices made.
Yeah, agreed.
I agree. And something that I love is that in the original script, there were lots and lots of writers on this, obviously. And somebody said they were surprised how well it turned out, given how many writers were writing it. But in the very first original script, there was a wedding at the end. And the main characters did not die. And thankfully, that was not there. Thankfully, the main character, I love that they died. And I love that they had a respect relationship. That's what they became peers, and that's what brought them together. Not some fucking romantic thing, and they had to kiss. And no, they just looked into each other's eyes because of this. The hugeness of what they were feeling had nothing to do with human romantic emotion, and I love it.
Yeah, it's kind of bigger than that.
However, I would say this movie does not pass the Bechdel test.
No, it doesn't.
Unless you count well, to explain the Bechdel test.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Two women have to be talking to one another and not about a man.
Right.
Yeah, a substantial scene where two women talk about something other than a man.
The only thing I can think of is Jen and her mother.
Maybe a little bit between Jin and Mon Mothma.
But that's about getting to see her dad. Everything in the movie is about seeing her father.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong about that.
You could even argue that what makes her special is her father.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the reason that everyone is interested in finding her or using her.
Yes.
But she proves herself a very capable character. I mean, she makes good on the, you know, I mean, also part of the brilliant conceit of this movie is it explains why the Death Star had this vulnerability. And the explanation it provides.
This is some serious Midrashim here. Like, oh, crap.
Yes.
It's so stupid.
Those Imperial engineers must have just been fucking off, or we got to tell a story.
I feel like the way he explains it is so, like, in that message is so ridiculous, though. He's like, that is where I laid my trap. And it's like, it's not a trap. It's, you messed something up. You know, you made faulty shells for the war. You know, it's what you did. And I don't know. It's this really long explanation about, okay, we got it. Got it.
I don't know. I think I've seen episode 4, I think twice since seeing Rogue One. And I, for what it's worth, I do think about it when I see the original Death Star battle now. I think, yeah, because Galen Erso thought to, you know, load this weakness into it and that's what makes all this possible. I don't know. It's a little bit like in the way Solo kind of retcons explanations for the Kessel Run, and
I don't mind that it's there and we explain it. I just feel like the language he uses to explain something that would be so difficult to get done. I don't know. He just goes on and on about it a little bit too much for my taste. But it does explain.
Brevity, Galen, brevity.
Yes. I mean, especially in one of those hologram things. How much does that cost to send? You know?
Yeah. You've got to tip the messenger. And
how much data is he using?
It depends on your plan.
Yeah. So Galen dies first, right? No, well, who dies first? Let's talk about all the people who die, because that's rare.
Pretty much everybody. I mean, except the characters we like, Vader, for example.
Is there anyone you really, really wished had lived because you would have liked to have seen them in the upcoming episodes or in 4, 5, 6, or any? I mean, like. Well,
I would just like to see more of the big furry white thing.
The big furry white thing?
Yeah, I forget what he's called.
The Yeti?
Yeah.
On Hoth?
No. The one that was in this movie. He's not a Wampa. That's from Hoth. He's one of Saw Gerrera's people that brings Bodhi.
I'm never looking at anybody but Bodhi.
I see. Well, there was a really hot Yeti behind him that you missed.
I don't have really hot Yeti on Bingo either. That sucks. A few little trivia things that I found out. I don't know if you already know these, but during the final battle, Red 5's X-Wing is hit and he dies. That becomes Luke's.
That leaves room for Luke, right?
It didn't occur to me.
Another really nice Easter egg is that Red Leader and Gold Leader are the guys from Episode 4 in footage not used for Episode 4. So it actually is the same Rebel force that we're about to see.
And one of them came in and did new dialogue, too.
Looped some new dialogue, yeah.
And there was supposed to be a Blue Squadron originally, and this is how I got my bio for you, Marc-Anthony. The blue kept interfering with the green screen.
Oh, of course.
Gold and red, and they couldn't use it. And then at apparently 1 hour and 45 seconds, there's an explosion that turns into a Mickey Mouse head. I did not look this up today. I mean, I read it. I didn't look at it today. So everybody go look it up. 1 hour, 45 minutes explosion that looks like Mickey Mouse head.
1 hour,
Disney.
1 hour, 45 minutes, mouse head. Okay, check. Those sneaky Disney rats.
Another thing is, well, that's like the penis in The Little Mermaid or whatever that was, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Anyway.
I thought that was a dream I had.
Okay. Another first, no transition wipes.
Yeah. Also, locations are given as, chyrons at the bottom of the screen. That's new.
Well, if we're talking
but not with every planet except for Mustafar, which I think is interesting.
Yes.
They name all the planets, but not Mustafar.
Yes. Noah was the one who told me that it was supposed to take place on Mustafar. I had no idea. I mean, of course, he stayed there because he's still recuperating.
Yeah. This is where I fought Obi-Wan. I'm going to brood right here.
No. It's actually an interesting choice, right? Because it's 20 years after Episode 3.
Yeah, he has not let that shit go.
Yeah.
No, he's going to sit there and stew in his anger.
Should we talk about Vader a little bit? This is an interesting, I think, Vader movie because it's the first time we see the familiar Vader since Episode 3, since knowing the details of how Anakin got put into that suit. It's very effective. Vader in this movie seems like, for such a familiar villain, like newly terrifying. And the scene where he just, fights his way through, at the end, through that hallway of rebels while they just barely get the plans through the crack in the door. That's great. I was scared of Darth Vader.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's so pandering, but it's just so perfectly done. I mean, it's like the Star Wars, but, way more bombastic, and it's great. it's we don't often get to see Vader just being Vader.
And how do you feel about the line, be careful not to choke on your ambitions?
I love it. I'm a sucker for that, you know. He's a villain. That's the way villains talk sometimes.
Very noir.
It's very, if you watch episode 4 immediately after Rogue One, you notice lots of little things. And that Vader scene where he's coming down the hallway, there's a kind of alarm sound effect in the background, this wah, wah, and that exact same sound is heard on the Tantive 4 in that opening scene in episode 4. It's very, I love the way Rogue One just delivers you right to the doorstep of episode 4, you know. You see Vader like standing there, and then the next time we see him, he's coming down the hallway on that ship.
I wish I could remember who it was, but I saw a video where someone said that, you know, you have the explosion on the ground of Scarif and Andor and Jyn Erso, you know, kind of going into this blur, and he says that's really when Rogue One ends and the prologue to episode 4 begins.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very
that's
true.
exactly what it is.
It's very true. It's also the first theatrical Star Wars film to have dialogue in the last scene.
Huh.
Because there's not a parade for anybody, because nobody won.
Oh, right. No one's, yeah.
The Wookiee's not missing a
Well, what about, oh no, yeah, you're right. Good point.
So they talk in the last scene. Yeah, they're the first to have the on-location captions. They're the first where the title is said.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
When they give call sign Rogue One. And apparently Lucas and family, you know, were laughing at it being Rogue One because it was the Rogue One. It was not, you know, the Star Wars movie didn't conform to anything, so it was the Rogue Star Wars film. So, okay, so let's. There's something I wanted to talk about. I can't remember what it was. You guys talk for a second.
Okay, well, I just got a couple of other little Easter eggs or tidbits or things to throw out there. I mean, I like how Krennic with his Death Troopers were the opposite of Vader with the Stormtroopers. So you had Krennic kind of is white and in the middle, and he's flanked by these black troopers, and then Vader's the exact
Where did these Death Troopers come from, and where did they go?
Well, okay, originally the idea was supposed to be that they had some kind of shrunken head, and there was just like a cyborg brain in there.
But they haven't appeared before, and they never appear again.
They're only for like very specific. Look, I could come up with some bullshit. I don't know what the bullshit explanation is, but it exists. Someone knows it. It's just not me. But I assume they're specifically intimidation style troopers, unlike the other friendly, cozy, comfy ones.
Yeah, cuddle up kind of troopers.
Dolly troopers.
Wait, I wanted to. Oh, okay. So what I like to think about, and what I was talking to Noah about, and what really intrigues me about this movie is thinking about what the other characters in the canon are doing right now. And like Noah said, this delivers us right up to the door of episode 4. So it's the week before episode 4 starts.
Mm-hmm.
So
Luke has been masturbating behind Tashi Station.
Yes, and whining, and they've just gotten the droids. Because, well, no, that doesn't make sense.
Do they have the droids yet? No, they don't have the droids at all. No.
No, because she has to.
Luke is just, you know, flying his T-16 around, bullseyeing womp rats.
Yes. And then she sends the droids.
And Kenobi's like, God damn it, where are they?
Yes.
Chewbacca is also sitting there waiting for his cue. Yoda told him to go.
But like Han is dropping his load at the first sign of Imperial entanglements right now.
Mm-hmm.
And Leia's
right.
We know what she's about to be captured by Vader.
Right.
Luke is, you know, whatever. Beru and I guess Owen are just hanging out. They're all doing that. Solo.
They're just, you know.
I guess yeah. Everybody
milking the wampus.
Isn't it interesting how the in this movie in particular, because it takes place at pretty much the same moment as episode 4, how the this series is sort of locked into all these late 70s style choices as far as haircuts and stuff. Rogue One did a really nice job with that, I thought. Everyone looked pretty convincingly like they could have been in a movie that was made in 1977.
I guess. I didn't even notice that.
Wow.
Is Marc-Anthony frozen?
Oh, Marc-Anthony does look a little
frozen in carbonite. Again.
He's alive and in perfect hibernation. Well, maybe we need the folks at home to clap your hands.
Clap harder, harder. It's working.
I wonder if Marc-Anthony can hear us right now.
I bet he's aware of the problem.
Maybe.
Unless he's been...
Oh, no. Now he's been replaced by his own name.
Oh, I'm hot.
It is warm.
You can turn the air on.
I guess I could. Oh, I think he's
here. I am.
Ah, there he is.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
No problem.
So is that your church fan, Marc-Anthony?
Yes, it is. Lord. Now, this was a fan given to me by the music department of the Toho Gakuen College of Music and Theater, Drama and Music in Tokyo.
That would have been my guess.
You would have gotten it. You should have said so. I wanted another little Easter egg I wanted to point out just before I forget. In one point, are you there? Hello?
Hello?
I will be.
Oh, okay. So there's a call in the rebel Masashi Ruins temple for General Syndulla, who is a character from Star Wars Rebels. Or at least there was a Hera Syndulla from there. It could refer to her or her father. But she was a Twi'lek. She was pretty cool.
Isn't there something... there's a voice cameo for Captain Antilles?
There's a mention of him. Do we hear his voice? We might hear his voice.
Something into, they were like, yo, Captain Antilles or something.
Right. Also, I don't know if this is definitely intended to be this, but I assume it is. The way that they're kind of retrieving the data tapes with the little controller things, I think is supposed to be a reference to THX 1138, Lucas's first film, where the protagonist and titular character, his job was using these kind of control things to move explosive or delicate equipment.
Sure it was.
So I'm sure that was a reference to it. Or could have been.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it probably was. I want to know why she had a hook on the back of her pants that fit that cartridge handle exactly.
Yeah. It's a data cartridge hook. They're common. You can get them at any bodega on Coruscant. You can get them. You might have to have them imported to Mos Eisley or something, but they're not uncommon. You never know when you're going to need to steal a data tape.
5.
I love that the tapes kind of looked a little bit like 8 tracks.
They do.
They do. And I love that, yes, it's not that she shoves that thing in there, you hear it click, and everybody who's our age and older misses something. That click when you push something in and you hear it and you go, yep, it worked.
Mm-hmm.
That is very nostalgic, just physical media. Like, they're still using physical media.
There's also the mention of Project Black Saber. And I don't know if this is definitely that, but I assume that this may be related because there was the Dark Saber was a special blade that was technically a lightsaber, but it created more of a blade rather than a light thing, and it was black. And this was kind of a indication if you held this, you were head of the Mandalorian army, basically, something to that effect. And eventually, Darth Maul got this saber. So
I feel like I've seen that somewhere.
You may have seen it in the Darth
clip.
Maul material we looked over, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that as of the point of Solo, he would still have that saber.
The use of the phrase "the force of others" And also the identification of Chirrut's monastic order as the Guardians of the
Guardians of the
Wills,
Wills.
W-H-I, and the Kyber crystals being a plot, a kind of MacGuffin in the story that power the Death Star as well as lightsabers. These are all, I believe, references to the very early drafts of Star Wars, George Lucas's initial creative efforts toward it. The Journal of the Wills was the originally identified source of all the Skywalker legends, and the Force of Others, along with something called the Bogan Force, where these were concepts that he kind of hashed out before landing on the idea of the Force.
Am I wrong in
Right.
that it's a fan theory that Yoda is a Quill?
Ah, I didn't know that.
I think that is a fan theory.
Oh no.
Might be in the Wills, some of the later Clone Wars things, or creatures that could arguably be the Wills. I don't know if they're confirmed to be the Wills, but they seem to be more ethereal, angelic kind of things.
And that little green thing?
And not that Yoda is not beautiful.
Beautiful in his own way.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have a question about them. Then they are coming in and they're like they're showing the force of the Death Star, and he says we'll just practice in one spot. Why would they blow up the spot where they mine the fuel for the Death Star?
So theoretically, they'd finish mining it. That's the best I got.
Yeah.
But also, I think there's a slight possibility that Tarkin or someone, or even the Emperor, were doing it specifically to piss off Vader. Because I think we're supposed to feel that Vader is really kind of religious in a sense. And even if he was turned to the dark side, that's a holy place for the Jedi, and he would be pissed off about it.
Interesting. And that's, of course, Jeddah is a very holy city, very special city.
Right. And I think I may have read somewhere that like this is the origin of the Jedi religion, that's why it's called Jeddah, is that this came out of there.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Are there any other firsts? Well, okay, so we have the locations on the bottom. Is this movie the one with the most different locations? Because there are a ton.
Most planets.
Jeddah, we've got starts with a K and it's ugly. The outward trading.
Carice or something like that. Caprese
Yeah.
salad.
Caprese, yeah. And we have Edu.
Yeah.
Edu, Mustafar.
Lamin.
There are quite a few in Attack of the Clones too, though. There might be a few more in that. And I mean, well, and also Revenge of the Sith, you have all of the places where the Jedi get killed.
Oh, that's true. Or in the special edition Return of the Jedi, at the end, you see a bunch of worlds. The story idea for Rogue One, it might be worth mentioning, originated with John Knoll, who was a visual effects supervisor on the prequel trilogy and also on the special edition versions of the original trilogy. And apparently it was something knocking around in his head for many years, and he would kind of talk to people at Lucasfilm about, hey, I got an idea for a movie. And he wound up pitching it to Kathleen Kennedy. And it's a good example, I think. I mean, I like that idea that Star Wars is such a giant undertaking that somebody who had an important but supportive role in the creation of some aspects of this saga could come up with such a good and on brand and in universe kind of idea for it and actually see it made. It's nice. There's some Lucasfilm DNA like in the idea for the movie.
Well, that
right
nicely into what do you think makes this most like a Star Wars movie, and what do you think makes this the least like a Star Wars movie?
Well, I mean, I do feel like the lack of Kurosawa wipes makes it less like a Star Wars movie, but at the same time, I feel like it really seems like he researched Kurosawa, and there's still a lot of visual framing that's very Kurosawa. So he's still giving a nod in that direction. It's not just the same nod that Lucas did. The titles is a big thing. and the the lack of a opening crawl makes it feel a lot less Star Wars in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it doesn't deal with the Skywalker family much at all, other than brief appearances from Vader and Leia. It's not principally about the Jedi. I mean, now we have the example of Solo as another Star Wars movie that you could say that about, but I guess that's it. But I go back to what I said before. I think what's novel about it is mostly tone and style, It's convincingly set in the world of these movies, but it's shot very differently, and it feels different because of the aspects of the epic struggle that are being emphasized here. What makes it feel more like a Star Wars, or most like a Star Wars movie, is the fact that it so plainly takes place in that world, and it's a very, it's a very convincing recreation of the world we got to know in Episode 4. Is that Rebel base the same location from which Luke and Biggs?
It is the same. I mean, it's the same location in the story. I don't believe they're using the same set or anything like that. And I understand that for this one, they actually built an exterior to film in front of, which is amazing.
Oh, wow.
It's possible some of the set pieces are from the Yavin 4. From
another location.
Yeah.
And Mustafar, which we didn't know that's what it was, or I didn't know that's what it was. Which
I read that today, preparing for this. I say, oh, that makes sense. That was Mustafar. But the lack of a Chiron to let us know is an interesting choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer my own question. I think it's most like a Star Wars movie because it just is. It's just I don't know. This is a terrible answer, but because it is the story of how Star Wars started. No, it's not. That's not true. I think it's most like a Star Wars movie. I don't know why. I can't answer the question I just asked you.
Well, it has all the marks of a Star Wars movie, except for the emphasis is a little different. But it's so convincingly the world, so specifically of Episode 4, too. I mean, one thing about it that I noticed from the first viewing and enjoyed about it is stormtroopers. It's the original stormtroopers. Like, we're now used to seeing all these variations on what a stormtrooper is, Even from Empire Strikes Back onward, we got those Hoth troopers that look a little different. And in Return of the Jedi, the biker scouts and the clone troopers in the prequels, But these are 1977 stormtroopers,
Yeah.
They have sideburns, for example.
Yes, and big gold glasses. I guess what makes it feel most like a Star Wars movie to me is, it's the way. It's kind of actually the way it looks, and even though the mood and tone and feel is different, the way it looks and the pacing of it and the humor of it. Of course, a lot of it is taken word for word or scenario for scenario from other Star Wars movies. The transportation of the prisoners, where you take prisoners, I'm going to imprison them, I'm in prison.
In prison.
And then he tries to take them away. That's done when he's, on the thing, boring conversation anyway, that's the same thing there. A lot of humor is borrowed directly from other Star Wars movies. So that feels right to me.
See, but it's interesting because I feel like those things that it does directly borrow, for some reason, the way that it borrows them makes me feel really happy rather than irritating me, which is kind of the opposite of my reaction to The Force Awakens. Like, a lot of those things make me just kind of wince. And with this, it just feels loving and sweet and fun. And it works within the context of the movie that it's in.
You're in good company, Marc-Anthony, because I read that George Lucas is on record saying specifically that he liked Rogue One better than The Force Awakens.
Yes.
And that makes sense to me. In a way, from his point of view, I do think, I mean, I love The Force Awakens, but I think Rogue One is, I believe that as a tribute to Lucas's creation and a continuation of his work, it makes perfect sense to me that he would find more to enjoy in Rogue One. It's a more creative, in some ways, it's a more creative expansion of the idea of Star Wars because it scribbles in the margins rather than adding an episode.
And that's kind of where I was just thinking, where would I, if I were showing somebody Star Wars for the first time, I wouldn't want to start with episode 1, 2, and 3 because I don't think they'd make it. And I think they'd be like, why are you making me watch this? And I was like, well, I've always thought I would start with 4, 5, 6. And then I'd say, now that you love it, we got to go back and watch the stuff that, it's like, if it were a book, it'd be great. Like just with the knowledge, but it's terrible. But now, I mean, I don't know, would I want to watch Rogue One before episode 4, or is it just made so good because we've seen that crawl so many times?
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's a competent and good action movie, and Marc-Anthony's story about his friend seeing Rogue One, in a virginal state, that proves that, you can enjoy this movie without knowing episode 4. But to me, it relies very heavily on episode 4 for its subtext. I guess it's all the things that make it maybe something more than just an exciting action movie. That is all informed by its proximity to episode 4 and the way it plays with, what little we know about the events immediately leading up to episode 4.
Why do you think it makes it made that Rogue One feel this way, but it didn't feel that way with 1, 2, and 3?
Well, I think it does in 1, 2, and 3 also. I mean, I know there's an argument for watching the prequels first and watching the story chronologically. I'm not challenging the idea that that's a valid way to enjoy the films or an interesting way to present them to somebody who doesn't know them. But personally, for me, the wellspring of my interest in Star Wars is my childhood love of the original trilogy. And so what I love most about the prequels is where they expand and enhance the world that was introduced in those 3 films. Rogue One, because it takes you right up to the moments before episode 4. The parts of the prequels that give me the greatest goosebump feeling are the final stretch of episode 3 for that very reason. It takes you very close to the familiar story, and that moment in episode 3 where it's Vader and Palpatine and even Tarkin, a young Tarkin we briefly see, and the Death Star just beginning to be constructed. That's really exciting. That's kind of what I want from a Star Wars prequel.
Anything more?
Hated it.
So where did this movie fall in your rankings? We did rankings last week, or of our favorite Star Wars movies, top to bottom. Mine was number 1 was Rogue One. I
think mine was like number 7, like 6 or 7, something like that. But I think since watching it a few times since then, it's probably climbed up the list quite a bit.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier this episode, I can't find my rankings at the moment. I don't have them handy, but I remember thinking when I ranked Rogue One, wherever I ranked it, which I imagine was after all 3 of the original trilogy and episode 3, and maybe also Force Awakens and Last Jedi. And I remember thinking, how am I going to tell my wife I ranked Rogue One so low? But it's for that reason. It's a fairly new film. I didn't grow up with it. It's not deeply baked into the fabric of who I am, the way the original Star Wars movies are. So it's not as like close to my heart as those other films. But I love it. I think it's really worthwhile. And also it's interesting. At the time that it came out, Force Awakens was still fairly new, and this was, we were told, the first of a whole series of Star Wars anthology films that were going to do exactly what this movie does, which is take you into the Star Wars story from different angles with maybe different creative approaches, let the voices of different kinds of filmmakers have a hand at telling stories in this world. and sort of bring us different perspectives on some of the same stuff. And Rogue One, and I wasn't sure if I liked that idea or not. And then when Rogue One came out, it was, it's okay, well, that worked out pretty well. And it made me excited about maybe that the anthology films would continue even further in that direction. And maybe we would get in-universe Star Wars stories in a whole range of styles, and that was exciting to me. Star Wars comedies, Star Wars mockumentaries, that would have the same, like, carefully, lovingly recreated look into the Star Wars universe as Rogue One, but with a more diverse kind of storytelling palette. And that didn't happen, partly because Solo didn't do that. Solo is a standalone film set in the Star Wars universe, but I don't think it has the kind of fresh perspective that Rogue One has. Making Solo feels more like a quasi-Star Wars movie to me. Not that it is without its pleasures. So in a way, Rogue One has this feeling of unfulfilled promise about it, not because the film itself is disappointing, but because it seemed for a moment like this was the opening to a whole new kind of Star Wars movie that we haven't, at least since then, we haven't really gotten any follow-up on.
I mean, I expect that the follow-up that we're going to get is going to be more televised. I think that things like The Mandalorian and there's going to be a Cassian Andor show, which will be a prequel to this movie.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of, and now that they've announced that Obi-Wan will be, it's going to be a mini series is what it's going to be now. Is that the?
I know last week there was a piece in Variety that Ewan McGregor was in talks with Disney about an Obi-Wan series, for the Disney Plus streaming network. Which
right. They're going to get us all.
I suppose we'll have to.
If you ever want to watch anything ever again, Disney Plus. We own all media.
Yeah.
Every bit. Including this right now that we're doing, by the way. Disney owns
this. We are owned by...
every bit of it.
We bow to the mouse.
Yes. 1 hour, what was it? 1 hour, 45 minutes. Mouse blows up. Anyway, so I think we've covered most of the things in Rogue One and how it's what I take away from it is that it's so new in so many ways, but that it still feels like a Star Wars movie to me. That it brings so much more life and context to the rebellion and how scrappy the rebellion's always been. It shows you that it's always been time to scatter their forces. They've never been strong. We get into 4, 5, and 6. They're not strong. It's the strongest they've been. But we get into the prequels are not strong. No, everybody's weak. It's not weak. I'm sorry. You just realize that they're scrappy and they're this tiny force and how anemic they are from this movie, and I like that a lot.
Make 10 men feel like 100.
Yes. Or if you watch Cobra Kai, you prefer that. Make 2 men feel like 20. And then but I also, I like that the protagonist is a female, but that isn't what makes me like it. But I really just love a lot of the characters here. Forrest Whitaker, Jin. I like them all. I think all the characters actors do a really good job of distinguish their characters from other people in the Star Wars universe. You can definitely make Cassian into a Han Solo, and they didn't.
I think Jyn Erso is a very interesting character, and the fact that when Rogue One came out, we had just seen Force Awakens with a female protagonist, so we had already had that, the novelty of like, good, the main hero of this movie is a young woman instead of a young man. Great. So by the time Rogue One comes out, we're used to that already. It doesn't get maybe as many points for that as it might have had Force Awakens not preceded it. And so what winds up being novel about the Jyn Erso dynamic is this very different kind of relationship with a father who stands on the boundary between good and evil. Jyn is not a mirror of Luke Skywalker, but a sort of corollary to Luke Skywalker in interesting ways. She also starts off as this child on a farm, and she's orphaned very early on in the story. And Luke is a young man in a prosaic environment who craves adventure and excitement and wants to go to war and wants the fight. And Jin is a character who only wants to return to normalcy, who just wants her father back and wants to live life outside the persecution of this empire. That's what she's fighting for. And that's very interesting. And the Galen's death scene, you know, where she is briefly reunited with him, it's just really interesting. We're very used to the Star Wars movies offering these kind of meditations on fathers, and it's been fathers and sons most of the time, but on, you know, parents and children, and the legacies and the burdens that are passed along to the next generation. And Jin and Galen Erso, it's a worthwhile and different take on the same thing.
It somebody, I didn't write this down, it's kind of the same thing you just said, but they put it very well, that Luke wants to get away from home and all Jen wants to do is to go home.
Yeah, there it is.
And I think that's a good place for us to say, hey, go Rogue One. Good job, guys.
Good job, Rogue One.
Good job with your Star Wars story. So I don't know what we have next. Noah Diamond usually knows.
Oh, you mean next time on Faces of Stone?
Next time on Faces of Stone.
Well, he said, stalling for time while he pulled up the schedule for Faces of Stone. Well, actually, I can tell you that in our next episode, which is 2 weeks from tonight, in other words, September 1st, we're going to be discussing a little-known film called Star Wars, a film that used to be called Star Wars when it was new. Now it's called Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. Hey, we finally made it to the beginning, guys. After all, this is our 8th episode, and next time around, number 9, we'll talk about the first Star Wars movie. And I do recommend anyone who's watching, it is a lot of fun to watch Rogue One and then immediately, don't even watch the credits. As soon as Leia says, Hope, stop it and watch Episode 4. It's pretty seamless and beautiful.
Indeed, agreed with that.
And who is going to be hosting our discussion on A New Hope?
I believe that would be me.
Well, see, that's another reason to watch.
And another reason to take all the interest you can in the Faces of Stone project by visiting us online. Facesofstone.space is where you can find our entire schedule, our archive of past episodes, talking about Star Wars, as well as Twin Peaks: The Return in 2017. Also, hopefully 2 weeks from now, when we're back with our next episode, hopefully we really will be live again. As you may know, Google Hangouts on Air has cruelly pulled the rug out from under us, and we're still trying to figure out how to do these live again. Until then, we'll do them live to tape, but who knows, maybe we really will be live in 2 weeks. On social media, you can find us pretty much anywhere, but on Twitter, it's M_A_Macon, president of Sisk, and Noah Diamond. Any last words?
I don't tweet.
I only,
but I don't tweet.
Yeah. I don't tweet either.
Okay.
Not untweeting solidarity. I'll sometimes
tweet
forward
once in a
things
while.
to Twitter. Yeah.
I just want to thank you guys for helping me talk about my favorite Star Wars movie. And I guess that everybody should just tune in next time for more of their favorites at
Faces
of
Stone.
Stone. Thank you.